Okay, so here's a quick video on how to render still images. Okay, so even if you have an animation and you decide you want to render out some really nice shots that you have that you like, that you want to just keep them as still images um, for whoever knows what purpose you might need it to be. So first thing you want to do is you want to go to your render settings. Okay, um, now if you're doing animation and you're doing stills, you'll want to make sure that you're checking both your output and your frame range. So your output, things to consider, if particularly if you're doing a still, um, what are you using it for? So if it's going to go on the web, if it's going to be digital use, then you can pick something from screen. If you want to have it match the video, then you should do the same sizes that we've been recommending for the videos themselves. So that would be HD sizes. So the HDV, HDTV 720, that's 1280 by 720, or the HDTV 1080, that's 1920 by 1080. If you were printing it, which might be a reason why you were doing both, is that you're rendering out your video, but then you also want to be able to print it. So then you would go to the print sizes so that you have like letter 8.5 by 11, landscape, same thing. Now, if you pick a format like that, like say I pick letter, over here, you'll see that it looks very different from what we normally see. And what this means is that wherever it's grayed out, that is actually not going to be part of your rendered image. Okay, so this is the proportions of an 8.5 by 11 document. So the extra here that we normally have that works for our 16 by 9 ratio for animated video based on the HD dimensions, this is different here for the print. Okay, so whatever is the bright portion is what's going to be rendered. The sides here are going to be, that are grayed out, will be cropped out. Okay, and so my render settings here, it says 8.5 by 11, resolution 300 pixels per inch DPI. That is what you would want if you were printing it. Normally 72 DPI is what we do for animation and for things that are going to be used digitally. If you were printing it, it needs to be 300. So that would be the big difference here. So 8.5 by 11, which again is a standard sheet of paper size, resolution 300 dpi, and then you would want to come down here and say current frame, which is usually the default. So my playhead, I like the way this is set up here. I like this frame out of the animation, so I want to make sure that that's frame 18. Current frame is 18. Okay, so I want to pick the frame and I want to make sure it's its current frame. Okay, so that it's the frame that I have my playhead on, which is the little blue marker here. Okay, so now that I set those settings, so that's important depending on what you're doing. So you want to make sure that you have the right size, the right dimension that you want to work with, the right resolution, and then you want to make sure that your frame rate is current frame if you're picking from out of your timeline. You want to make sure that you have the appropriate frame that you want to render. Okay, so I'm going to do this 8.5 by 11 print size just so you guys can see the difference, because normally we're using the standard video sizes. So again, now you could automatically save here. And if you want to make sure that you save everything that you render, set this up. So then you would go to File and you would save it, give it a name, tell it where it's going when it's done saving. Okay, and then you would tell it the format. Again, these are all still image sizes. These are the videos. Okay, now you're probably not going to want to use video. You don't want a QuickTime or an MP4 that's one frame. It can't play. So those are really senseless right now. But these ones you can choose for your still image. Okay, so again, I'm not going to save it because I like to save from the picture viewer. But again, just as a note, it's not saving automatically if you don't do it in the render settings here. Okay, so that also means if Cinema 4D crashes, anything that's in the picture viewer that's unsaved, they get pitched. Okay, so if you're worried about it, or you want to make sure that you save everything and then you can sort of narrow them down later, then make sure that you set this up if you want to save automatically. Okay, if you're not doing that, then when you do a Shift R to send it to the picture viewer, okay, you see it's rendering. Okay, now again, this is 8.5 by 11, so it's probably going to take a couple of seconds. Shouldn't be too long. Okay, I'm going to zoom out so you guys can see the whole thing. All right, so this is my 8.5 by 11. Now, granted, if I was really going to be printing this 8.5 by 11, I'd probably want to move my camera or make a new camera so that I set this up to really take advantage of the dimensions that I'm working with. Okay, but this is, at least you can see it's a very different ratio, and you can see that it looks different from what we normally set up for video, which obviously looks like that. Okay, so now I want to save it. I go File, Save As, okay, and then up here, you want to make sure that the type is still image, okay, because you just want to render out this one frame, okay. Now the format, default is usually TIFF, so I would put it back to TIFF, okay. Now, here's a note, okay. TIFF is probably the best choice for you out of here. And you might say, well, why am I not doing a JPEG? Okay, the important thing here is that you have spent the time rendering. You should not have to compromise the quality. Okay, so what that means is a TIFF is uncompressed. You could always take the TIFF and save it as a JPEG. Okay, a JPEG is compressed, so you are going to lose quality. So if you spend the time here to render out your image and then you save it as a JPEG, you will lose some of the quality that you just spent time rendering. Now, I only spent 18 seconds on this render, but if you spend 4 hours on a render and then you save it as a JPEG, that's time that you wasted rendering just to save your image and then throw out some of the quality. So that's really not a good idea. You should save, when you're done rendering, you should save it as an uncompressed format, and then you could always save a JPEG from that file. So save as a TIFF, save as a PNG. Both of those are going to be uncompressed, which means the file size is going to be on the larger size, but they are going to be 100% quality. Okay, then you could always open up Photoshop or another image program and save the TIFF as a JPEG, and then you'll have a smaller file that has a little bit less quality. Okay, but definitely I would always recommend that you save your renders first and foremost as an uncompressed file type for images so that you have the maximum quality. And then you can always save a smaller version, but to save as a JPEG right away means that you're going to your render is going to suffer some loss of quality. Okay, so I'm going to do TIFF, still image TIFF. Now, important here. Okay, I know that I rendered this as 8.5 by 11, and it was 300 DPI. This wants to save it as 72 because that's the default. So I'm going to make sure to change that so that it's 300 DPI. Okay, and if anything goes wrong, then I'll just go back and re-render. Okay, and I'm going to say okay. Okay, and I'm going to say that this is Deformers Bend frame 18. Save. Okay, so now it's saved. So I go to my Finder window. And there it is. Okay. 2550 by 3300. That sounds about right. That's 8.5 by 11. Okay. Now, if you wanted to go and do another one, you go back. Say here I threw in another camera so that I could change the angle here, and I go in. You know, I want to make a much more dramatic shot to really take advantage of the 8.5 by 11. Okay, so there we go. So I'm going to send that to the render queue. Okay, we're coming up on this finishing my render now. Okay, almost 30 seconds. Okay, so now I go File, Save Image As. It should be the same as the last time, so but it's always worth double checking. So type still image, format TIFF. Everything else is good. DPI is 300. Okay, so I'm going to say okay. All right, and I'm going to save that as frame 15 and put close up. Okay, and again, I can just go to my Finder window, pull that up, desktop, where I put it, and now you can see there's my image.